Is it possible to read someone's face and draw accurate conclusions about their personality and preferences? Well, my guest today claims to be able to do just that. I'm Caleb O Dowd, and this is the show that brings you profit-producing ideas and secrets from the greatest marketers in the world. My guest today is Joseph McGuire, author of the fascinating book, Face Facts, The Art of Reading Your Clients and Prospects for Sales, Recruitment, and Negotiation. The art of facial profiling and reading people is an absolutely fascinating topic. So I'm truly excited to explore this with you here today, Joseph. Welcome to the show.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure, Caleb. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is probably one of the most interesting topics that I've come across in quite some time. I was thinking before today's session how popular you must be in almost every social gathering you go to.
Well,
And I was also thinking what an amazing superpower skill for a single man to have, the ability to read people's faces. So I'm really looking forward to this. How about you just, give us a few minutes of background information on, who is Joseph McGuire? How did you get into, and how did you get into face reading?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I do get multiple reactions when I'm in different gatherings because I get people who are fascinated. I get people who are actually terrified, and even some people who know me well are terrified because they think I'm looking into their soul and seeing all their dark secrets, which is not what I do or can do and wouldn't want to do anyway. But my background, as you can probably tell from the accent, I am Irish. I'm from Dublin. I'm currently living in Dublin, but I have lived in multiple other places and will live in other places in the future. I was reading people as a small child. I just intuitively knew stuff about people, men especially. And as most men would know, women remain a great mystery anyway, but that's part of our lifelong learning. But I formally trained and studied when I lived in London between 81 and 85. I trained in a branch of Oriental medicine, and I was introduced to facial diagnosis, which is one of the diagnostic approaches fundamental to Oriental medicine. But their approach is always understood that the mind and the body are inseparably connected. So rather than thinking, as in the West, we think of the heart as a muscle in the chest, etc. They think in that the heart or the liver or the kidneys as related to different aspects of our personality, behavior, thinking processes. So that was altogether more fascinating for me than simple mechanics of the body. And I studied intensely over 4.5 years, and then I've done a lot of formal, further training since then, not just in terms of reading faces, but in terms of body language with former FBI trainers and negotiators and interrogators. So I don't just look at faces, I'm also listening to people. And the Chinese symbol for listening incorporates not just the ears, but also the eyes, the mind, the heart, and recognizing that our whole body is actually a transmitter and a receiver all the time. So we're picking up so much information and transmitting so much information from our body all the time without doing or saying anything. So faces are just a part of that.
Amazing. Yeah, I read your book, Face Facts, which was short, sweet, and absolutely fascinating. And one of the I guess you immediately got into facial shapes, head shapes, and I just thought on a kind of a macro level, I immediately got out the mirror and looked at my own face and my own shape of my face. But can you tell us a little bit about the different face shapes and what that can kind of tell us about people and how this whole art of face reading, if it is considered an art, I suppose, or perhaps a science, how does this help business owners specifically? How can this help us perhaps do more deals, have better negotiations, and so on?
Yeah, absolutely, because it has to be practical. It has to have practical application in everyday life. The system I work with it's a traditional Chinese system. The documentation goes back some 3,000 years. It has been used in business and politics as well as medicine over that period of time. So it does have a very solid documented background. So when we're looking at a static facial a static face, whether it's an image or somebody just like being expressionless, that's giving us so much information about who they are, how they think, how they process information, how they prefer to be communicated with, whether they're open, whether they're more closed and analytical, whether they're more sort of creative minded, whether they're in a place of deep stress. All of those things are visible in somebody's static facial features. So it tells us primarily, firstly, how to communicate with them, because we so often operate from our default communication pattern, that how I communicate is how I communicate, rather than being aware that we need to adapt our communication style, sometimes even our behavior, if we want a deal to go across the table. But it's also recognizing when we're in a deal, when we're in a potential deal, sitting across the table, whether it's a virtual table or a physical table from somebody, it's recognizing where they're at right now, as well as what the facial features tell us about where they've come from. So there are many, many layers to it. And we're recognizing whether, for example, very simple things like whether somebody needs to be communicated with very quickly. If you need to speak very fast to somebody because that's how they process, or do you need to slow it down, or do you need to talk in feeling terms? Do you need to talk purely in terms of data? All of that information is visible in somebody's static facial features, and then you add in their body language, their facial expressions, the micro expressions, their tone of voice, changes in tone, pitch, rhythm. All of those things are very, very revealing in terms of where somebody is really coming from, as opposed to where they profess to be coming from.
One of the things that fascinated me most about your book there was the forehead and hairline, and how one particular person is somebody who's very organized, very detail driven, somebody that likes everything to be put in order and in great detail, as opposed to somebody who has more of a creative mind, more of like an imagination type of personality. And I just thought, gosh, what a superpower it is to be able to, in an instant, be able to look at somebody, in a deal scenario, in a negotiation situation, where you would be instantly able to align yourself with exactly the type of mind that, and the personality that person has. If you're talking to somebody who's really detail orientated, well, then it's time to get into the nitty gritty details. Whereas if you're talking to somebody who's far more creative and imaginative, you're having a big picture, vision orientated discussion with that person. I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. It just made me realize how inefficient communication must be without this this incredible skill.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite quotes is from George Bernard Shaw, where he said, "The greatest illusion about communication is that it has happened." And there's another one. There's another one from Peter Drucker, who's regarded as described by many as the father of modern management. And he said something to the effect that the biggest part of communication is in what isn't said, and that's paraphrasing.
Again, there's so many interesting places for us to go. It seems to me like the face is just this map of information here, but things like the forehead, and you talked about in your book about how the face can be split into two sides, and I think you said the left side is kind of the can tell you all about their social facing side of their personality, versus the right side being their kind of private life. Did I get the sides right?
The other way around.
The other way.
Yeah.
So, like how does this kind of information, like if you're, is it something that you can read in like an instant? Is it at a glance, and you can kind of maneuver yourself to that person in an instant, or is it something that kind of this information unfolds over time as you enter into a conversation with somebody? I guess I'm asking, like, in an instant, can you get the complete picture, or does the complete picture need to unfold over a few minutes upon meeting someone?
I will get a lot of information instantly.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've learned is to not make assumptions. That's
Really?
one of the big
Okay.
things. So I like to give it time, and whether
Yeah.
that's 5 minutes or a bit longer, I like to
Yeah.
give it time because it's so easy, even for me with 40 years of experience, to assume something, but I
Right.
prefer to check for the evidence. Again, one of my favorite quotes is from Carl Sagan, the late astrophysicist, I think it was, and he says, "I don't want to believe, I want to know."
Yeah.
So I want to be very,
Yeah.
very clear about the evidence. So when I'm looking at a face, I get a lot of information quickly, but then I want to check what is the actual evidence behind it. So I do want to hear people speak. I do want to
Okay.
hear their tone of voice, their rhythm of voice, watch their language, or watch their body language alongside it. Because one of the other things when I'm doing training, one of the things I like to watch for, I'll show people video clips of different, often politicians speaking, and I tell them to watch it with the sound on and then rewind and watch it with the sound off and ask if what you're now watching is congruent with what you heard.
Huh.
Because people can present something in terms of their words, in terms of their language. It can be very articulate, but their body may be telling you something very different.
Interesting. So it seems then that, it's the face reading side of things, kind of goes hand in hand with, communication skills, verbal communication skills on top of it. It's not that one is the be all and end all. It's kind of the two need to go together. You get a hint from one that you need to validate from the other, and vice versa. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a whole communication package. So there's what our static facial features are, our natural posture, if you like, are revealing. But then it's what people say, how they say it, changes in how they say it. And one of the things I've learned to listen for is what people aren't saying.
It makes me realize that there's so many people in my own personal life that perhaps I'm communicating with in such an inefficient and ineffective way. Perhaps primarily my 6-year-old son,
No.
who rarely listens to anything I say to him. So now
Mhm.
I'm going to be comparing his facial features to everything mentioned in your book there, in the hope that I will
Yeah.
be able to get through to him in a much more compelling manner.
Well, absolutely, but children are a whole other species. And another of my favorite quotes is from Peter Ustinov, where he said that parents are the bones on which children cut their teeth. So in
Wow.
many ways, as a parent, you're there as a challenge to them as well as a nurturer and protector.
Yeah. So in terms of like again, kind of coming back to some specifics, about facial shapes. Can you kind of maybe take us through some of the more common facial shapes, and tell us a little bit about what we can learn from those facial shapes?
Sure. Well, in the Chinese system, they recognize there are 8 basic face shapes, and each gives an outline, but only an outline of a personality type. So you can get a quick glimpse, as it were, as to how this person is likely to approach pretty much anything in life, because there will tend to be a consistency in their behavior. But then you're looking at the details. You're looking at, like you mentioned, forehead shape, forehead size. Uh, Eyebrows tell a lot actually about how people actually process information, and whether they're more linear, more data oriented, whether they're more creative, feeling oriented, whether they're more autocratic. Um, Eyebrows actually tell a lot, and they're often ignored for all sorts of reasons. The eyes then tell so much. So the face shape is the outline. So, for example, if I can use you as a model, Caleb, if that's okay.
Please do.
Your face shape would be a combination of two, which would be oval and rectangular, and many of us are a combination of typically two. So the oval bit is where harmony is very important to you in all your relationships. So you will seek to create harmony. If you're in an environment where people are being very aggressive or being very stroppy, it's not comfortable for you. It doesn't mean you can't deal with it. It doesn't mean you can't deal with it, but it's not where you're at your best. Whereas if the environment, the atmosphere is essentially peaceful and constructive, you can really thrive. That's where people really get the best of Caleb. But also then the rectangular shape is one we traditionally associate with leadership qualities. So when you're in a relaxed environment, when you're in a relaxed state yourself, you're well capable of stepping up and taking charge and demonstrating leadership. And one, if I can add, I'm like Lieutenant Columbo. There's always one more thing, because you've got a well-developed nose and a well-proportioned nose in terms of your face. You're well capable of speaking up and expressing yourself and saying, "Look, guys, this is what's happening. This is what needs to happen." So, although you prefer harmony, you prefer things to flow along nicely and everybody work together, you're well capable of stepping up and saying, "This isn't working, guys. We need to sort this."
Amazing. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, and actually, you kind of answered my next question, which was, as I was looking at my own face, I realized I'm actually a mix of exactly the shapes that you said there. So I guess it's true that it's not that there's any one shape. There can be like a mix of shapes. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's adding in the detail.
Yeah.
Because, like, if I can just refer to yourself, because you referred to the forehead earlier. If we can combine the eyebrows and the forehead here, your eyebrows are essentially horizontal. So that tells me data is very important to you. So when people are communicating with you, particularly in a business context, they need to have their data in order. They just need to, because otherwise, if they don't, you're wondering, what am I doing here? Why
Yeah.
are we here in the first place? And you also have this little sort of dip here around the bridge of the nose, which tells me that time is valuable to you. You want your
Yes.
time. You want your time to be used wisely. So if you're meeting somebody, you're respecting their time, but you expect them to respect yours as well. And again, just to go to the forehead, your forehead kind of curves back. So that tells me you absorb information quickly. And when somebody presents you with information, you don't just see the option they've presented. You like to think, because your forehead curves back, particularly at the top here, you like to take a few moments, or maybe even longer, think, okay, this is what they presented, but we could do it this way, or we could take it there. You like to see variable options rather than just the singular one.
I absolutely agree with that as well. I don't know where I read this before. I think it might have been from a guy called Jay Abraham, but he always talked about linking assets together. Like you have one thing here and one thing over there. Like you should write all of these things down and see if you can link them and connect them. And I'm always thinking in that way. I'm always thinking about, okay, this guy said this, and then this other guy over here said that, or there's this opportunity over here, to try and link all of these things. I think is a a big part of what I do on a daily basis. So yeah, it's very fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Sorry to cut across you there.
Go
If I
ahead.
can just throw in one other thing, because, and this is not doing the Columbo thing again. This is not referring specifically to faces, but one of the areas where I can be called in is where a negotiation has stalled, and I'm not so much helping with the detail of the negotiation, but the personality side and the behavioral side, and how to communicate with the person or the people across the table, because so often people get stalled in the detail. They think this is the only thing on the table, and
Yeah.
it's like they reach a stalemate, where I'm helping them to communicate with the person and to realize you may actually have a lot more in common with the person, and if you get to know them and what their real interests are, what their real motivation is, then you may find there's a lot more potentially on the table than either of you has realized.
Well, I think that that's a huge point because, in my, limited experience of doing deals, certainly the type of deals I do would be much smaller deals in comparison to perhaps, a Fortune 500 company for sure. But in my own experience, what I've learned is that there is the details of the deal. There is the deal itself. And most commonly, the deals are done more on a relationship level than the offer or the details of the deal itself. Anytime that I've kind of done a deal based on the data alone, the deal is usually pretty weak, and doesn't kind of back out over time. But when a deal is kind of done on more of a relationship level, it seems to just kind of go very, very, very well and last substantially longer and be a lot more lucrative for all involved. So I think that everything that you just mentioned there, including this skill, this ability to kind of move beyond the details, the offer itself, and really kind of get into the relationship side of things, must be so powerful for deal making.
Yeah, and it's to recognize that not everybody is open to that one either. For example, the incumbent president of the US, he's known for as a deal maker, but he rarely does more than one deal in the same place, because he tends to be very direct, almost you could say antagonistic in his deal making process. So he burns a lot of bridges, and that's just using him as an example of somebody who's not about relationship. It's about getting his way in the deal, but it doesn't present him with many opportunities to do a second deal in the same location, which might actually be more lucrative.
To kind of break down the relationship kind of bonding process that can and should take place during a deal of some description, is it really, it sounds like it's a lot more than just aligning yourself with the way that the other person likes to be spoken to. We spoke a moment ago about speaking with somebody that's very detail orientated. Well, if you speak to that person in a very detail orientated manner, that doesn't necessarily trigger a kind of a bond between you two, or does it, Joseph?
Not in itself, no. Yeah. Not in itself. Yeah. But that's where I typically work with people to help them prepare for meeting the person as opposed to simply the deal. Yeah. So I will go through a process with them. I'm looking at identifying who they're going to be dealing with, who they're going to be negotiating with, and do a profile of that person. So we'll be looking at identifying their personality, their characteristics, as opposed to simply whether they're more detail oriented, etc. So what are the potential ways in to meet them as a person? So again, it broadens the discussion. It's not just about the detail.
So if you're enjoying the show, just a quick reminder to press the like button, subscribe to this channel for more useful monetization tips, and turn on notifications so you don't miss all of the great tips coming your way in future episodes. And thank you so much for sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues. I really appreciate it. I guess, as I think about kind of bonding with somebody in a relationship environment, I've never kind of broken it down and understood it in a way. I always just either kind of click with people or I don't, But I guess like my question here is, how would you use this skill of face reading to really kind of connect with somebody beyond just kind of understanding the type of personality that they have? I mean, usually you connect, I suppose, with somebody based on values, based on beliefs, based on your social circle, based on your passions, your interests. I mean, is there a path to those directions with face reading? Like, how do you use face reading to kind of get into those kind of more personal bonding type of experiences with somebody?
Well, with my experience, and that's obviously an advantage I have, or in some cases a disadvantage, because when people know what I do, they may run away. But that's a whole separate topic. But when I am in that place of working with somebody, the eyes tell me a lot about where somebody's really at, whether somebody's really happy, unhappy, whether they've a history of past unhappiness and struggle, and it tells me so much. The old saying that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Now, whether we get into metaphysics or not, that's a whole other thing. But the eyes tell me so much about where somebody's really at, and very often the right, as you mentioned earlier, the right side is the public persona, the left side is the private persona. So you will often see differences in what is being projected in public as to what's being projected in, or what's being hidden, as it were, or covered, protected on the private side. So depending on who I'm meeting and the context in which I'm meeting them, I may start asking questions about what's going on in the private side. And not in terms of invasive, but say, you appear to be under stress here. It looks like there's a lot going on beneath the surface, And in terms of that, what I'm using is elicitation rather than direct question. I'm suggesting a question by my statement, and then shutting up and allowing them to decide whether they wish to follow through on that or not. And a lot of the information gathering stems from looking at the face, but it's then how I use my other skills to get people to divulge more of what's really going on for them.
You know, I have encountered a very small number of people that I always find quite difficult to communicate with in business. And perhaps I can only really think of two guys, to be quite honest. But these are guys that are easily distracted. Their eyes are, there's like a lot of computing going on. There's just a lot of data running around in their head. And I'm always wary of those guys because I find those type of business owners, entrepreneurs, very difficult to connect with, very difficult to do business with. When you encounter somebody like that, I guess I'm kind of asking: is there warning signs of that might be valuable to know about? Is there any kind of stop signs, warning signs that this is not a good person to kind of do business with, or not a good person to be around? Perhaps you could give us some examples of warning signs if they exist.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll come to the warning signs bit in a moment, because I don't tend to put people in boxes, and I'm not implying that you are, but I don't tend to put people in boxes in terms of more difficult, less difficult. But in terms of people who are primarily data driven, and where you say there's a lot of computing going on, typically what I've learned to do is to not say very much, not over talk, because if they're processing a lot, they don't want to be listening to somebody speaking at the same time. So I will speak in short sentences. I may ask questions, or I may make a statement, or I may use, like I said, elicitation, which is a statement implying a question, and then I will shut up. And sometimes that means requiring extended silence. And I've learned to be very comfortable with silence. I can sit comfortably with somebody for 30 minutes and say nothing. And I'm perfectly relaxed with that. And whether that's in a social or business context, but most people feel anxious when the silence goes beyond even 8 seconds or thereabouts. So there's that element. So certainly people who are primarily data driven, they're doing a lot of processing. So shut up when you're with them and allow them to process, and then make a statement, or then ask a question, and that draws them out. But if I can just go to the warning signs, pay attention to the eyes. Pay attention to the eyes, and there are 3 basic possibilities that you'll get in terms of the eyes. That the eyes will be warm, but there's what we call the full Duchenne smile, where when their face lights up and the eyes sparkle, and that's somebody exuding warmth. And you'll often see that with small children when they're happy to see you. You'll see that, you'll know that they're just lighting up. There's the other one, which is neutral, where it's just not sure. And then the other one to really pay attention to is if you get a feeling, and it is a feeling of coldness from the eyes. Like in some of my classes, I've shown photos of like serial killers, so people get the message of what coldness looks like and coldness feels like. And our body will tell us, because it's not just, like I said, it's not just the eyes and the ears, it's the body. And the body gets a feeling of, not so sure, but we tend to second guess ourselves. So, yeah. But if you get that feeling of coldness from somebody, that's somebody you're better off just exiting stage left as soon as possible.
I think so many people are not even conscious, not even aware of themselves in a conversation. And as a result, if their ability to receive information is switched off, they can get themselves into a lot of trouble. I'm aware of somebody in my own private life who entered into a relationship with somebody, and it's very clear that this was a a personal relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
a very complete mismatch. And I've thought often how that match happened and how it could have happened because
Yeah.
it's such a mismatch. And, the only thing that I can kind of assume is that, you know, um, both parties were switched off to to receiving all of the information, I guess, that was available to
Yep.
them. So I think just even kind of being aware and present in a communication, I think, allows a lot more information to flow. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I've actually I don't just work in a business context. I've helped a lot of women who've had, shall we say, negative experiences with men in relationships, and I'm helping them to recognize these are the red flags, and there are a lot of red flags when it comes to relationships and dating and all of that, and it comes from when people are looking to manipulate or be deceptive, or even magicians and illusionists, they score by people not being attentive, not being tuned into what their body is telling, not being present, as you say, because it's so easy to mislead, deceive, if that's our intention.
And I guess it's a fine line too, whether it's in the dating world or in the business world, you obviously want to present, the best version of yourself. But I guess there's a line there where presenting the best version of yourself, crosses over into just flat out manipulation.
It can do, yeah, it can
Yeah,
do.
yeah. I mean, so just on that front, I mean, how do you tell the difference, I guess, between somebody who's presenting themselves as you know confident and competent versus someone who's really trying to manipulate you. Confident and competent can be good, whereas somebody who's just really trying to pull the wool over your eyes is negative. I mean, how would you determine the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've done a fair bit of work in terms of executive interviewing as well, and it's very easy to present with a very glowing CV and et cetera, and to be very articulate, very well dressed, elegant, and all that, and to see, there's no real substance there, and it's very apparent. So I'm paying attention to not just the facial features, the facial expression, but the body language, how people speak, and it's so often it's a sense of there's something off here. So that's when I'll just start throwing in a few, I won't say pointed questions, but challenging questions, and shut up. I'll keep the questions short, and I'll watch and listen to how people respond. There are a number of indicators that somebody's on. It's not so easy necessarily to spot if somebody is being deliberately deceptive, or you tend not to spot it quickly. But there are a number of indications, visual indication that somebody's under stress in the moment. So, for example, if somebody starts, you know, chewing their lip while they're speaking or while they're listening, it tells you they're under stress right now. Whatever topic is being discussed, they're under stress right now. If the eyes start blinking rapidly, they're under stress right now. If you can see the whole body, if you can actually see their feet, and I know we're not, that's not possible here when we're online together. But if you're in the physical presence of somebody and you can see their feet, and their feet suddenly move together during the conversation, you have hit a hot spot.
Huh.
Yeah, you have hit a hot spot. So you need to register that. Not typically challenge them on it at the moment, but let the conversation flow on and then come back to it. That topic, what we were talking about there a couple of minutes ago. Um, I'm just not clear about that. Can you just clarify X, whatever it might be, and see if the feet move together again, or the lips start chewing, or the eyelids start fluttering. All of those are hot spots.
Interesting. Are there any kind of general questions that you could ask somebody that would, like you just mentioned a minute ago, if there were inconsistencies, that you would ask some questions that would either validate, or that would validate those inconsistencies. Are there any kind of, and I know it would probably be, very specific to each person and situation, but are there kind of general questions that are recommended perhaps for somebody to ask in a conversation that would reveal information that would be beneficial?
I would say not specific questions as such, but what I'll do is actually recommend a book, and it's not my book. This is a book I've found absolutely invaluable in life as much as in business, and it's a book called Never Split the Difference. It's a very well-known book. It's on negotiation by a guy called Chris Voss, who was the FBI's chief hostage negotiator for many years. And there's so much practical life wisdom in that about gathering information, about using tonality, about how to ask questions or how to respond when people are either asking you questions or when you get the sense that people are stonewalling. There's so many practical applications there for who looking beneath the surface and getting an insight into what's really going on.
Yeah, I took that guy's masterclass, I think, a couple of years ago, and I thought that it was very interesting. And of course, I never put any of it into into any practice at all. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like dealing with children, then I kind of find myself thinking children must be an interesting topic since their faces usually change every few years. How is this kind of, like, I have my son is 6 years old, so he looks very different at 6 than he did at 3, obviously. So, with a kid, is it always kind of evolving, or is it you can just kind of perhaps profile a child, and then it is what it is, and you're able to deal with that child in that manner, permanently, or is it always a moving target, and that personality you know is constantly changing, and you got to move with the time, so to speak?
There's an element of both. I was a therapist for 30 years, and I treated a lot of very young children, including babies who were like 4 weeks old. So I could look at the face. I could tell there's a lot about the personality that will emerge. And
Wow.
then I've met the children 6, 7, 8, 9 years later, and the parents are telling me, "Oh yeah, you told me to look out for this, and this is what's happened." That I remember one particular example where I met I knew the parents well, and they brought the child for a session. I can't remember what the issue was, because I did a lot of hands-on treatment, and I looked at the child and I said, "This guy is going to be asking you a lot of questions. And if you do not answer the questions or find the answer to the questions, he is going to get really annoyed with you." And a few years later, I met them and they said, "Oh yeah, that was spot on." So even a newborn baby, you get an outline of the personality, but then there's what happens during life. So over the first, I know psychologists will tell you the first 7 years are the most formative. So it's how much nurturing they get, how they respond to what happens, whether they really open up and blossom, or whether they withdraw, or there will be family traits as well. For example, like, I don't know if you can see it clearly with me, but there's a very distinct vertical line here in the middle of my lower forehead, and that's a family trait. It's very common. So when you see that, that's an indication that there's a family pattern of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar levels. So if you don't deal with your blood sugar levels, you go into a state of being hangry,
Yeah.
hungry and angry.
Yeah.
And it also tends to go with perfectionist tendencies. So if you see that even on a young child, you'll know they tend to be self-critical. They tend to put themselves under pressure to get it right. And even if you praise them, they will say, yeah, but. So they find it difficult to accept praise. So there are a lot of visual indications you can get even on a young child's face that will give you guidelines as to how best to engage with them.
It's such an interesting topic, and one of the things that I was amazed at, from reading your book, is just how many government organizations, how many Fortune 500 companies are using this this science, this art. It's 3,000 years old. How is this data validated? Is it just by saying, hey, you've got this forehead, so that means this, and then the other person is like, yeah, it's true. Or is there like, is it validated in some other manner, beyond just kind of verbal feedback?
Yeah, it's primarily through verbal feedback and if you like, accumulated documentation over that period of time. I've come across very limited, if you like, academic documentation. I've come across some, but not in huge volume.
Yeah. So, it's 3,000 years old, which is very, very impressive. The fact that, people have been continuing this art form for that length of time. Is it still growing and evolving, or is it kind of, it's all pretty much figured out at this stage?
Oh no, it's always evolving. It's always evolving because we are evolving as a species. We're changing a lot. And for example, in the ancient Chinese system, men typically didn't grow beards. So even something as basic as facial hair, that wasn't considered part of their system because it just didn't happen. So adjusting to that, facial features have changed and evolved over the last several hundred years. If you look back at history, I mean, obviously we're not seeing photographs of people in the 16th, 17th century, but we can assume that the facial portraits were reasonably accurate. You will see considerable changes in facial structure over the last couple of hundred years, and even over the last 100 years. Like if you look at photographs of your grandparents, as opposed to at the sort of age you're at now, you'll see distinct differences. They looked much older.
Yeah.
Than you. So there's a lot of changes. So the practice has to evolve.
Wow, amazing. I'm here in Spain, and I was at a bullfighting museum. And one of the things that I was struck by was the size of the clothing of the bullfighters. And it looked like these guys were easily 30% smaller than the average human being around these days. And I asked about it. I said, is that just a small bullfighter, or is that? And they're like, no, that's actually, we've grown in size as a species in general since, in the last few hundred years. It seems like we've gotten bigger than perhaps, at least some cultures were, a few hundred years ago. So it's interesting stuff. Joseph, this is a fascinating topic. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and talk to me here today. I know that I want to progress in my understanding of all of this. I can't wait to look at my own wife in a whole new light.
Dangerous territory, Caleb.
So where do I go to find out more about this? I've read your book on Amazon. So Face Facts is the name of it. I've read that book and I'm hungry for more. So on behalf of myself and my listeners here, where can we further our knowledge and understanding of this this science, this art that you have mastered?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I do have a website, but it has been neglected, so I do need to start paying attention to that. But the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, Joseph McGuire, and you'll see the line Face Facts. And I tend to work more in companies or in-house with companies or online, provided, work for companies rather than do a lot of my own stuff as such. But I'm always open to inquiries, shall we say. So if anybody reaches out to me with a question, suggestion, I'd be more than happy to engage.
Fabulous. Joseph McGuire, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Caleb. Absolute pleasure.
So there you go. I'd love to know, based on what Joseph and I discussed today, have you ever used this type of information to read people in your own business? Please go ahead, share your thoughts below. I look forward to hearing from you. And also, if you have a question about marketing, advertising, or monetization that you would love my help with, then all you got to do is send me an email to caleb@monetizationresearch.com, and I'll do my very best to include my response in an upcoming episode. And as always, the best way to stay in the loop with all things monetization related is to join my free newsletter, which is called Monetization Daily. You can go and get it at monetizationresearch.com, and we will send you our favorite news, tips, tactics, strategies, and discoveries about how to monetize your business, which is ultimately all about increasing your profits. Again, head on over to monetizationresearch.com.